Didn't cry, I didn't argue, I just picked up my sons, turned around, and walked back to my car. That moment, standing at the entrance of a venue I had written a $47,000 check for, being told by a security guard that my children were not welcome, that was the moment something inside me went very, very quiet. Not the kind of quiet that means you've accepted something, the kind of quiet that means you've finally stopped arguing with reality. Let me back up. My name is Stella. I'm 31 years old. I live in Oakville, Ontario, in a house I bought myself after my husband passed away 3 years ago. Joel died of a brain aneurysm on a Tuesday morning in February. He was 32. He had just made coffee. Our boys, Finn was 4, Owen was 2, were still asleep upstairs. I heard a sound I cannot describe, and by the time the paramedics arrived, Joel was already gone. The life insurance payout was significant. Joel was meticulous about that kind of thing. He used to say, "I never want you to have to ask anyone for anything." I didn't fully understand what he meant until he was gone, and I realized how many women end up dependent on parents, on in-laws, on government programs when their partner disappears. Joel made sure I wouldn't be. I loved him for a lot of things, but I loved him for that most of all. I took a year to grieve. Then I went back to work part-time as a dental hygienist. I put money aside for the boys' Resparked accounts. I fixed the fence in the backyard. I made lunches and did bath time and read bedtime stories, and I kept going because Finn and Owen needed me to keep going. That was my life. It was small and it was hard and it was mine. My half-brother, Connor, is 4 years older than me. We share a father. Dad remarried when I was 7, and Connor came along as part of that package. We were never particularly close growing up. He was the type of kid who was always performing for adults, always saying the right thing in the right room, always leaving before the dishes needed to be done. As adults, we'd settled into a polite, functional relationship. Christmas dinners, the occasional birthday text. That was about the extent of it. His girlfriend, Ember, was a different story. Ember was the kind of person who made you feel, within 10 minutes of meeting her, that she had already assessed your worth and found it slightly lacking. She was beautiful and knew it. She was charming in front of people who mattered to her and barely present in front of people who didn't. I had watched her glide through 3 years of family gatherings without ever once asking me a single question about my life. Not about Joel, not about the boys, not about anything. She was Connor's girlfriend, so I was polite. That was all. When Connor called me in March to tell me they were engaged, I congratulated him. When he said they were planning a destination wedding in Niagara-on-the-Lake at a Heritage Inn, I said that sounded lovely. What I did not say, and should have, was that this was the first time in my adult life he had called me for a reason other than asking for something. The conversation shifted about 4 minutes in. The venue, Connor explained, was expensive. They'd found the perfect place, restored Victorian property, private grounds, catering for 120 guests, the whole thing. The package they wanted came to just over $47,000. Their savings covered about half of it. He had already asked their father, our father, who had contributed $5,000 and said that was all he could do. Amber's parents were, as Connor put it, not in a position to help. "I know you've been doing well, Stell," he said. I want to be clear, he never once asked directly. He presented the situation. He described the gap. He said he knew things had been settled for me since Joel. He mentioned that Amber had always dreamed of a proper wedding. He said he didn't want to ask, but he also didn't know who else to call. It was, I now recognize, a masterclass in manipulation. The ask was baked into every sentence without ever being spoken aloud. I was meant to volunteer. And I did. I don't know exactly why. Loneliness, maybe. The specific loneliness of grief which makes you reach toward family no matter how poor the soil. Maybe some part of me wanted to believe that contributing to something joyful would make me feel less like someone whose joy had been permanently evacuated. Maybe I just didn't think it through. I told him I would cover the remaining amount. He said, "I knew I could count on you, not thank you, not, I don't know how to repay this." He said, "I knew I could count on you," like he had done me a favor by calling. We signed a contract with the venue, the Ashbourne Estate, in my name as the guarantor. I paid the deposit directly, $15,000. The remaining $32,000 was due 60 days before the event. I paid that too, in 2 transfers in June and July. $47,000. In exchange, I received one text from Amber. Connor told me, "Thank you so much. Can't wait to celebrate together." And nothing else. No invitation to be part of the wedding party. No conversation about what I might wear or where I'd be seated. I found out from our aunt that the wedding was on September 14th at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I found out from my cousin that the rehearsal dinner was the night before. I was not invited to the rehearsal dinner. I told myself it was fine. Weddings were stressful. They were busy. I would show up on the day, watch my brother get married, and that would be enough. I drove to Niagara-on-the-Lake with Finn and Owen on the afternoon of September 14th. The boys were dressed, Owen in a little navy blazer he kept trying to unbutton. Finn in gray trousers he'd been promised were just for one day. I had a gift in the back seat. I had allowed myself in the car to feel something close to hopeful. We pulled into the estate at 3:45. The grounds were immaculate, late summer garden, white chairs arranged in rows, a stone archway covered in flowers. I could see other guests already making their way toward the ceremony area. Everything looked exactly as the photos had shown. There was a man at the entrance. Not a venue staff member. I recognized the venue uniforms. This man was in a dark suit, earpiece in, holding what I initially thought was a clipboard. It was not a clipboard. He stepped toward my car as I parked, and when I got out and introduced myself, he looked down at what he was holding. It was a laminated sheet with photos on it. My son's photos, school pictures, the kind that gets shared in family group chats, Finn's from last year, Owen's from the spring. Beneath each photo was a short note. I didn't read all of it. I read enough, not permitted on the grounds, potential disruption, by order of the event coordinator. I stood there for a moment. The man looked at me without expression. He said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but children under 12 aren't permitted at this event. It's on the invitation." I said very calmly, "I didn't receive an invitation." He said, "I'm just following the instructions I was given." I looked at the photos of my sons. Their small faces, printed and laminated and handed to a stranger to keep them out, and I felt the ground shift under me. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder and more final than anger. I said, "Okay." I buckled the boys back into their seats. Finn asked why we weren't going in. I told him we were going to find somewhere to have dinner instead, somewhere fun. Owen asked if we could go to the place with the mac and cheese. I said yes. I sat in the driver's seat for approximately 90 seconds before I picked up my phone. I did not call Connor. I did not call Amber. I did not call our father. I called the Ashbourne Estate's main office line, the one on the contract, not the event coordinator's cell. I had the contract saved in my phone. I had, on the advice of my late husband who was always meticulous about these things, photographed every page. The woman who answered was the venue's guest services manager. I told her my name. I told her I was the contract guarantor for the event currently underway on the property. I told her that I had been denied access to the grounds by a third-party security person, along with my 2 minor children. She asked me to hold. While I waited, I texted my lawyer, a woman named Patricia who had handled my estate matters after Joel died and whom I had kept on retainer, again at Joel's insistence, because he had believed very firmly in paying someone smart to read the fine print on your behalf. I typed, "I need you available by phone in the next hour. Family situation, the contract I forwarded you in August. I may need to invoke the guarantor clause." She replied in 4 minutes, "I'm here. Call when ready." The guest services manager came back on the line. She sounded careful. She said she needed to clarify a few things. She said the event coordinator had flagged a potential issue with the guest list, but that, as guarantor, I had specific rights under the signed agreement, including right of access to the property for the duration of the event. I said I understood. I said I also wanted to flag something else. The contract I had signed included a clause. Patricia had highlighted it, had in fact specifically said, This is the important one that stipulated the guarantor's right to modify or withdraw financial authorization in the event of a material breach of the agreed-upon event terms. The agreed-upon terms, which I had signed off on, had included a guest list that named me and my dependents. My children had been placed on a security exclusion list without my knowledge or consent. That was a modification of the event terms, made without my authorization, by someone who was not the guarantor. The guest services manager was quiet for a moment. I said, "I'm not trying to make this difficult, but I need to know, does the estate consider this a breach?" She said she needed to speak with their legal team. I said, "Of course, I'll wait." I took the boys to a diner on the main street. I ordered Owen his mac and cheese. I ordered Finn a grilled cheese with tomato soup. I had coffee and a piece of butter tart that I didn't eat. My phone was on the table. 22 minutes later, the guest services manager called back. She said their legal team had reviewed the contract and confirmed that modifying the approved guest list without the guarantor's written consent did constitute a breach of the venue agreement. She said they had informed the event coordinator of this finding. She said the estate was prepared to proceed in one of two ways. They could restore full access for all named guests, meaning me and my sons, or, if the breach was not resolved within 30 minutes, the estate would be required to halt the event. I said very quietly, "Halt the event." She paused. She said, "Are you certain?" I said, "Yes." I watched Owen eat his mac and cheese. He had a small smear of it on his chin. Finn was explaining something about dinosaurs with complete seriousness. I sat there in a diner booth in Niagara-on-the-Lake and I watched my boys, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, absolutely certain about something. I don't know exactly what happened at the Ashbourne estate in the minutes after that call. I pieced it together later from a few different sources. The estate staff walked onto the grounds during the cocktail hour. The ceremony had ended, the guests were moving toward the reception tent. A manager spoke briefly with Amber and Connor. The string quartet that had been playing stopped. The bar service was suspended pending the administrative hold. Staff began quietly and professionally explaining to guests that there had been a contract issue and the event would need to pause. My phone started ringing at 6:14. Connor first, then Amber, 3 times in a row, then our father, then an unknown number that turned out to be Amber's mother, then Connor again. I did not answer any of them. At 6:31, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. I didn't. The man on the other end introduced himself as Douglas Whitfield. He said he was Amber's father. I want to explain something here. I had never met Douglas Whitfield. Amber had always described her family as not in a position to help, which I had taken to mean financial difficulty. What I did not know, and learned only in the context of that phone call, was that Douglas Whitfield was a semi-retired property developer from West Vancouver who had chosen not to contribute to the wedding because he had significant reservations about the marriage itself. He had been, apparently, watching events unfold from across the reception tent with growing dismay. He said, "Miss Stella, I want you to know I had no idea about any of this." I said, "The exclusion list." He said, "The exclusion list. The way this whole thing was structured, my daughter did not tell me who was paying for this." A pause. "She told me it was Connor's family money." I said, "Connor's family money?" He said quietly, "I am so sorry." We talked for 11 minutes. He was measured and direct, which I respected. He said he had spoken with the estate manager and confirmed that the legal situation was clear. He said he was not going to interfere with whatever I chose to do, but he wanted me to know that he thought what had been done to me and to my children was wrong, and that if it came to any kind of legal or financial dispute, he would not be supporting his daughter's position. He also said something I have thought about many times since. He said, "The people who use generosity as a transaction always forget that the other person holds the receipt." We said goodbye. I thanked him. I sat for a moment with my phone face down on the diner table. Finn had finished his soup. Owen had fallen asleep against my arm, his head warm and heavy on my shoulder. I called Patricia. She walked me through it efficiently, the way she always did. The breach was documented. The estate had already issued a formal hold notice, which created a paper trail independent of anything I did. My options were to restore the event, which I had no interest in doing, or to let the hold stand, which would trigger the contract's cancellation clause. Under that clause, because the breach had originated from the client's side, the estate was not obligated to refund the event fees. However, as guarantor, I had the right to formally request a transfer of the refundable deposit portion, approximately $9,400, back to my account. I told Patricia to proceed. The event did not resume that evening. I drove home to Oakville with 2 sleeping boys in the back seat and the windows cracked because the September air was cool and clean and I wanted to breathe it. I didn't play music. I just drove. My phone had 41 missed calls by the time I got home. I read none of the texts that night. I gave the boys a bath, put them to bed, made myself toast, and went to sleep. The fallout started the next morning. Connor showed up at my door at 9 a.m. I had expected this. I opened the door, and I stood in the doorway, and I did not invite him in. He looked, genuinely, like he hadn't slept. He started talking before I could say anything, about how I had humiliated Amber, about how I had ruined the most important day of her life, about how guests had been standing around confused, about how Amber's grandmother had cried. He said what I did was vindictive. He said I was using money as a weapon. He said he thought I was better than this. I let him finish. Then I said, "Connor, you called me because you needed money. I gave it to you. In return, my sons' faces were laminated and handed to a stranger to keep them off the property. I don't know whose decision that was. I don't know if you knew, but I need you to understand that the moment I saw those photos, the transaction was over." He said, "It wasn't my idea." I said, "I believe you." He looked surprised by that. I said, "But you let it happen, and you didn't call me to warn me, you didn't pull me aside. You let me drive 2 hours with my kids to be turned away at the door of something I paid for." I looked at him. "I don't need an apology, Connor. I just need you to understand what you participated in." He stood there for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "She said the kids would make it chaotic." I said, "They're 4 and 6. He didn't say anything. I said, "I think you should go." He went. The calls from our father were harder. Dad was upset, not with Amber or with Connor, but with me. He said I had embarrassed the family. He said a mature person would have walked away quietly and spoken to Connor privately afterward. He said I had made a scene at his son's wedding. I told him, also quietly, that the scene had been made the moment my children's photos were printed and laminated. He didn't have a response to that. He told me I was holding a grudge. I told him I was holding a grudge. Amber called once, 2 days later. The voicemail was 4 minutes long. I will not repeat it in detail. She said, among other things, that I had always been jealous of her relationship with Connor, that I had been looking for an excuse to ruin the wedding since the beginning, and that she hoped I was happy with what I had done to my brother's life. Her voice was very controlled for the first 3 minutes, and then it broke toward the end, and I actually felt something, not guilt, but something more complicated. Pity, maybe. The recognition that she was in pain, even if that pain was entirely of her own construction. I did not return the call. Patricia's office sent a formal letter to Connor and Amber 2 weeks later, outlining the contract breach and the transfer of the partial refund. There was no legal challenge. I had not expected one. What I did not expect, and this still surprises me, was the card I received from Douglas Whitfield in October, a handwritten card on heavy cream paper mailed from West Vancouver. He said he and his wife had asked Amber some difficult questions in the weeks following the wedding and had not been satisfied with the answers. He said they were taking some time as a family to reflect. He said he hoped my boys were well. He said Joel sounded, from what I had mentioned, like exactly the kind of person the world needed more of. I put the card on the shelf in my kitchen, next to the photo of Joel holding Finn in the hospital, the day Finn was born. Joel is laughing in that photo. Big, unguarded, ridiculous laugh. He had no idea what he was doing. None of us do. I don't know if Connor and Amber ever legally married. I don't know if they rescheduled. I haven't asked, and no one in my family has volunteered the information. My father and I have spoken twice since September. Brief, polite, surface-level calls. I think we're both waiting to see what kind of relationship is left underneath all of this, once the dust settles. What I know is this. I know that Finn started grade 2 in September and has decided that his favorite subject is science because, he says, you get to figure stuff out. I know that Owen has started sleeping in his own bed most nights, which is a new and hard-won development. I know that on the last Saturday of October, I raked the backyard leaves into a pile and let the boys jump into it until it was completely destroyed, and then we raked it again, and they destroyed it again. And we did this for an hour until everyone was cold and laughing, and I made hot chocolate with the little marshmallows that are only for special occasions. Joel used to say I was too trusting. He didn't say it as a criticism. He said it the way he said most things, with a kind of wonder, like he couldn't quite believe someone had let that much of themselves stay open to the world. I think he was right that I trusted too easily. I think he was also right that I shouldn't try to fix it. Some things are worth keeping, even when they cost you. The check I wrote for $47,000 was one of the most expensive lessons of my life. What it taught me is worth considerably more. The thing I keep coming back to is the laminated sheet. Not the money, not the missed calls, not even Connor standing on my porch looking like he hadn't slept. The laminated sheet. Someone had taken photos of my boys, school pictures I had shared in a family group chat, pictures of Finn and Owen in their little collared shirts, and printed them and laminated them and handed them to a stranger. That was a decision someone made deliberately in advance with time and effort. That detail matters more to me than anything else because it tells you everything about what kind of thinking was behind it. I spent a lot of time since September thinking about why I said yes to Connor in the first place. I think the honest answer is that I was still grieving, and grief does something strange to your judgment. It makes you want to be useful, to be needed, to build something with the people who are still here. I mistook my brother's need for closeness. I confused being asked for being valued. Those are not the same thing, and I think part of growing up, actually growing up, not just getting older, is learning to tell the difference before it costs you $47,000 to find out. What I don't regret is how I handled the moment itself. I didn't scream in the parking lot. I didn't call Connor and make a scene in front of his guests. I picked up my boys, I drove to a diner, I ordered Owen his mac and cheese, and I made a phone call. Patricia always says the calmest person in the room has the most power, and I think she's right. There's a kind of clarity that comes when you stop trying to manage other people's emotions and just deal with the actual situation in front of you. I had a contract. I understood what it said. I used it. That's not vindictiveness. That's just knowing your own position and being willing to act on it. Douglas Whitfield surprised me. He didn't have to call. He didn't have to say what he said, but he did, and I think that's worth noting. Not because it changed the outcome, but because it reminded me that integrity isn't always found where you expect it. The ally doesn't always come from your own side of the room. Sometimes the most honest person in the situation is the one with the least to gain from honesty. Finn asked me once, about a month after it all happened, why we didn't go to Uncle Connor's party. I told him something came up and we had to leave early. He nodded and went back to his dinosaur book, satisfied. Kids that age are remarkably good at accepting a simple answer. I hope that when he's older, he's a person who asks harder questions about fairness, about what it means to keep your word, about the difference between loyalty and obligation. Those are the things I want him to carry. Joel used to say that character is just the sum of what you do when no one's watching. Sitting in that diner booth watching Owen eat mac and cheese while I quietly invoked a legal clause into a phone, nobody was watching. I was just a woman doing the right thing for her kids. That's enough. That has always been enough.